Intention alone cannot rewrite reality. That's where most manifestation teachings stop short. They tell you to set an intention, to visualize vividly, to imagine until it feels almost real. And while that has power, it's only half the equation. The quantum field does not respond to unfinished signals. It doesn't rearrange itself just because you pictured something once. Intention is merely the spark, the whisper that awakens possibility. But without the next step, it floats unanchored in potential. That missing step is collapse, the precise moment when potential condenses into form, when an option becomes the reality you live in. Without collapse, your desires remain imagination. With it, they become your world. Quantum physics explains this elegantly. Before observation, particles exist in superposition, countless probabilities existing at once, no single outcome yet defined. But the instant an observer engages, the wave collapses and one version crystallizes into being. This isn't philosophy. It's physics, and it mirrors the process of manifestation itself. You exist surrounded by infinite versions of you. The one who is abundant, healed, free, loved, limitless. All of them exist right now, suspended in superposition. Visualization alone keeps them hovering. Collapse is what chooses one. Collapse is what pulls it from potential into fact. Here lies the paradox. Most people never collapse the version they desire. They visualize. They affirm. They set intentions. But their identity, emotions, and nervous system remain loyal to the version they're trying to transcend. So even as they imagine expansion, they collapse the familiar, scarcity, fear, limitation, because that's the frequency they embody most. This is why people feel stuck in cycles of wanting without receiving. They're constantly collapsing realities, just not the ones they mean to. Think of your own life. How many times have you intended something greater, only to feel the gravity of your old story pulling you back? You say, "This time will be different." But beneath the words, your body rehearses the same fear, the same doubt, the same expectation of disappointment. That is collapse, happening unconsciously. The field doesn't respond to what you say once. It responds to what you are, consistently. This is the missing step no one teaches. Manifestation isn't about sending out a wish. It's about embodying a state so completely that the field has no choice but to become it. That's the puzzle most never solve. If collapse is always happening, how can you direct it toward what you actually want? The answer is not effort. It is not about trying harder, visualizing longer, or forcing belief. Collapse happens naturally when coherence exists. Coherence between thought, emotion, and body. Coherence between the state you hold and the reality you desire. When intention, feeling, and physiology align, collapse is inevitable. The field cannot deny a stable signal. The real question is not, can I manifest this? But can I hold the state long enough for the collapse to occur? This is why so many teachings feel unsatisfying. They hand you half of the equation. They tell you to wish, to hope, to dream, but they never explain that without collapse, you are only rehearsing possibilities, not living them. And this is why people spend years repeating affirmations without results. They never move past intention into embodiment. They never cross the invisible line where the field stops listening to their words and starts responding to their state. But wait until you see what happens when you do. When you step beyond imagining and actually collapse into the version of yourself that already has what you desire, that is when reality bends. Every tradition, ancient and modern, has hinted at this truth. Mystics spoke of faith not as hoping but as knowing. Neville Goddard said to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not as a temporary act, but as a state of being. Joe Dispenza explains that when you embody a future emotion before it arrives, your body is already living in that reality, and the field reorganizes to match. All of these teachings converge on one point. Collapse is not about wishing. It is about becoming, and becoming is always silent, always internal, always invisible to the outside world until the evidence appears. So here is the open loop we leave hanging in the air. If collapse is the missing step, and if it is the only step that transforms possibility into fact, then how exactly do you practice it? How do you stop visualizing your desires as if they are far away, and instead step into the version of reality where they are already here? The answer will require you to challenge the very way you think about manifestation, because what you are about to discover is that collapse is not something you do once. It is something you live. And once you see how to live as the collapse, you will never return to the old way of hoping again. Physics has a way of stripping away illusions. At its smallest levels, reality does not behave the way we expect. It does not unfold as a fixed and solid sequence of events. Instead, it exists as probability, as potential, as waves of possibility that only crystallize when observed. This is the essence of the wave function. Before observation, a particle is not here or there, not in one state or another. It is all of them, suspended in superposition. But the instant it is observed, the wave collapses, and one outcome emerges as the reality we experience. This process is called the collapse of the wave function, and it is happening around you constantly, whether you realize it or not. Now here is the radical connection. Manifestation operates by the very same principle. Every desire you hold exists right now as a probability suspended in the field of infinite potential. Wealth, love, freedom, healing. All of them exist as possible versions of your life, waiting in superposition. But unless you collapse into one of them, they remain probabilities, never fully chosen. The act of collapse is not random, it is guided by coherence. Just as the measuring device in physics forces the wave into a particular state, your consciousness, when aligned, selects and stabilizes a version of reality. You are collapsing wave functions with every state you embody. This is why intention alone is insufficient. Intention is like pointing at a probability, acknowledging it exists. Collapse is like stepping into it. It is the difference between watching countless doors appear in a hallway and actually walking through one. Until you choose, they all remain closed. And if you do not choose deliberately, you collapse by default, often into the same familiar patterns your nervous system rehearses daily. This is why so many people experience more of the same. Even as they dream of change, they are collapsing unconsciously, repeating the same emotional states, thoughts, and expectations. And so, the field reorganizes to reflect the same outcome again and again. The science of collapse also explains why change can appear sudden. In physics, the collapse of the wave is instantaneous. A particle does not gradually become an electron here instead of there. It becomes it in a single moment. Likewise, your life can appear to shift overnight. What looks like a sudden breakthrough is actually the instant collapse of probabilities that you had been aligning with for weeks, months, or even years. The evidence is delayed not because nothing is happening, but because coherence was building silently until it reached the point of inevitability. Then, without warning, reality shifts. But here's the incomplete puzzle. If collapse is constant, why don't people collapse realities they truly desire? The missing piece is awareness. Collapse responds to the dominant signal, and for most people, that signal is incoherent. They want abundance but embody lack. They wish for love but embody fear. They visualize freedom but embody limitation. Their field is like a static-filled radio, broadcasting mixed signals. And so the collapse always defaults to the strongest, most familiar frequency, the one they unconsciously embody. This is why the science of collapse matters. It shows you that you are not failing to manifest. You are constantly manifesting the state you embody most. Neuroscience echoes this truth. When a thought is paired with an emotion, neural pathways fire and wire together. Over time, these pathways stabilize into dominant circuits, and your brain begins to favor them automatically. This is collapse at the biological level. Your nervous system chooses which probabilities feel most real, and your perception filters reality to match. If your brain is wired for fear, you collapse fearful realities. If it is wired for possibility, you collapse expansive realities. The science could not be clearer. Your biology is the measuring device. Your state of being is the signal, and the field is the medium through which collapse occurs. And here lies the paradox that few acknowledge. Collapse is inevitable. You cannot not collapse. Every moment of your life, every emotional state you sustain, every belief you embody is collapsing some version of reality into form. The question is never, will it collapse? But always, what am I collapsing right now? This realization is both humbling and empowering. It means you are not waiting for manifestation to work. It has always been working. The field is always listening. The collapse is always occurring. The only variable is whether you are collapsing consciously or unconsciously. So let this question hang in your awareness like an open loop. If you are already collapsing wave functions with every thought and feeling, what would change if you learned to collapse deliberately? What if you stopped choosing the same familiar outcomes by default and began selecting the reality where your desire already exists? The science shows it is possible. The field is infinite. Collapse is constant, which means the only limit is the state you decide to embody. If the science of collapse reveals that you are always choosing a version of reality, the next question is unavoidable. How do you choose differently? The answer is not in trying harder, repeating affirmations endlessly, or visualizing with greater intensity. The answer is identity. Collapse does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to who you are being. Until you shift the self you embody, you will continue to collapse the same version of life, no matter how vividly you dream of another. This is why Neville Goddard's timeless teaching still cuts through so clearly. You do not manifest what you desire. You manifest who you are. He urged his students not simply to imagine wishes, but to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, to embody it, to become the person for whom that reality is already true. Joe Dispenza mirrors this in scientific terms. When your thoughts and emotions are aligned with a future possibility, your body begins to live in that future as if it already exists. Neuroplasticity encodes it. Hormones reinforce it. The nervous system learns to prefer it. And when your biology stabilizes in a new state, the field has no choice but to mirror that state back to you. But here's the paradox most miss. If you keep identifying with the old self, even while visualizing the new one, collapse defaults to the old. You cannot outthink your identity. You cannot say, "I am wealthy," while feeling like someone trapped in scarcity and expect the field to reorganize. The collapse responds to coherence, not contradiction. This is why so many attempts at manifestation feel like pushing against a wall. Intention says one thing, identity broadcasts another, and the stronger signal always wins. Think of it this way. Identity is like a tuning fork. Strike it, and it vibrates at a precise frequency. Place another tuning fork beside it, and soon they resonate in harmony. Your embodied state is the fork. The quantum field is the surrounding space. Whatever frequency you hold consistently, the field begins to resonate with. If you hold the vibration of lack, the field reflects lack. If you hold the vibration of abundance, the field reflects abundance. Collapse is resonance in action, and resonance is always dictated by identity. Let's pause here for a pattern interrupt. You do not attract what you want. You collapse what you are. This is why chasing, begging, and grasping never work. They are frequencies of separation. The field reads them as incoherence. But when you live as though it is already so, when you no longer question whether it will happen, collapse locks into place. The field has no resistance to coherence. It has no choice but to respond. So how do you embody the desired state? It begins in the body, not the mind. Your nervous system must learn what it feels like to already live the reality you seek. This is why emotions are the language of collapse. Thoughts without feelings are empty signals. But when thought and emotion fuse, the body begins to believe. Gratitude is one of the most powerful tools here because gratitude presupposes fulfillment. When you feel grateful for something you have not yet seen, you teach the body that it is already real. That emotional state rewires the brain, regulates the heart, and generates a coherent field. That coherence collapses probabilities. Story after story confirms this. Someone who lived years in financial struggle finally decided to stop identifying as broke and began quietly embodying abundance. Nothing changed overnight, but internally the shift was radical. They walked differently, breathed differently, made choices differently. Weeks later, opportunities appeared that had never seemed available before. Friends said, "You seem different," without knowing why. The truth is that collapse had shifted because identity had shifted. And when identity changes, the ripple is unstoppable. But here's the curiosity loop that must remain open. What if embodying is not about forcing belief, but about surrendering into it? What if the state is not something you create, but something you allow? This flips the struggle on its head. Instead of straining to believe, you release the need to prove. Instead of announcing the change, you live as though it has already occurred. This is the silent power of embodiment. It requires no performance. It simply requires coherence. Science supports this at every level. When you consistently embody a new emotional state, synaptic pruning begins. Old circuits that no longer match your identity weaken and die. Simultaneously, new connections grow stronger, stabilizing the new self. This is biology collapsing probability, and because biology feeds into the field, reality reorganizes accordingly. Spiritually, traditions call this faith, assumption, or surrender. Scientifically, it is coherence and neuroplasticity. Both point to the same truth. Embodiment is the mechanism of collapse. So let me ask you directly, what reality are you embodying right now? Not what are you wishing for, but what are you living as if it is already true? Your answer to that question determines what collapses. And if you want to change the answer, the shift does not require effort. It requires identity. Once you step into the state where your desire already exists, the field cannot ignore it. Collapse follows identity as surely as night follows day. Understanding collapse in theory is not enough. Knowing that reality responds to identity is powerful. But unless you anchor that knowledge into practice, it remains an abstract idea. Collapse must move from concept into embodiment, and embodiment requires repetition. Think of it like training a muscle. You cannot expect strength from one exercise. It is the daily quiet practice that creates transformation. And these practices are not dramatic. They are silent rituals, small intentional shifts that stabilize coherence until collapse becomes inevitable. Breath is the first and simplest of these rituals. Science shows that slow, coherent breathing regulates the nervous system, shifting the body from survival into creation. When you inhale slowly, hold gently and exhale longer than you inhale, your heart rhythm becomes ordered. Your brain waves synchronize and your entire system enters coherence. In that state, the signal you send into the field strengthens exponentially. It is not about forcing the breath, but about training the body to feel safe enough to broadcast a new frequency. Just a few minutes a day rewires the baseline of your biology. Imagination is the second pillar, but not imagination as wishful thinking. Imagination as rehearsal. Neville Goddard insisted that the subconscious cannot distinguish between lived experience and vividly imagined experience. Neuroscience agrees. When you rehearse a scenario with sensory detail, the same neural circuits fire as if you were living it. This is why athletes visualize performance before stepping into the arena. It primes the brain and body for success. To practice collapse, you must imagine not from the outside, but from within the desired reality. Feel the room. Hear the sounds. Sense the emotions of already living it. The richer the rehearsal, the more convinced your body becomes, and the more stable the collapse grows. Sleep is another hidden gateway. The minutes before sleep are when your brain enters the theta state, a bridge into the subconscious. If you fall asleep rehearsing lack, you instruct your subconscious to reinforce lack throughout the night. But if you fall asleep rehearsing fulfillment, grateful, peaceful, embodying the desired state, you carry that signal into the deepest layers of mind. The subconscious repeats it like a song on loop, imprinting identity at the core level. Night after night, you are either collapsing the old reality or the new one, depending on how you drift into sleep. But here is the incomplete puzzle. Why do some people practice these rituals faithfully and still feel stuck? The answer lies in contradiction. They may breathe, imagine, and rehearse, but spend the rest of the day feeding fear and doubt. Collapse requires coherence. A few minutes of alignment cannot outweigh hours of incoherence. The field listens to your dominant signal, not your occasional effort. The practice is not about perfection. It is about stability. If you return again and again to coherence, eventually it becomes your default. And when it does, collapse happens naturally. Here's the pattern interrupt you need to remember. Collapse is not about effort. It is about surrender. It is not about pushing reality, but about embodying it until reality has no choice. The practices are not steps to force the field, but tools to quiet the noise so your true signal can shine. You are not creating something new. You are aligning with what already exists in potential. The collapse is not a fight. It is a falling into place. Now I want you to anchor this moment with action. In the comments, type this phrase, "I collapse into my new reality." Write it not as a wish, but as a declaration. See it as the first ripple of coherence you are choosing to broadcast. It may look like simple words, but in truth, it is a signal to your subconscious that you are stepping into embodiment. The act of writing it out is itself a small collapse, a choice that aligns you with the reality you seek. Returning to practice beyond breath, imagination, and sleep. The fourth ritual is micro-habits. Every small action that reflects your desired identity reinforces coherence. If you are collapsing into health, choose one action each day that a healthy person would take. If you are collapsing into abundance, make one decision daily from the state of abundance, even if small. These micro-habits teach your nervous system consistency. Over time, they weave the desired state into your biology, and the collapse stabilizes until it becomes irreversible. Ancient traditions always pointed toward the same truth. Yogic practices of pranayama, Buddhist meditations on compassion, Christian prayers of faith, mystical visualizations. All of them are technologies of collapse. They were never about pleasing a god or performing rituals for others. They were about aligning inner coherence with the greater field. When you practice collapse daily, you are not inventing something new. You are tapping into timeless methods humanity has always used to choose reality. The ripple effect, so let me leave you with this curiosity loop. What happens when you stop practicing collapse only in moments of meditation and begin carrying it into every breath, every choice, every night of sleep? What happens when coherence is no longer an occasional exercise but your way of being? That is when collapse stops being something you do and becomes who you are. Every collapse begins as something invisible, internal, almost imperceptible. But once it stabilizes, its effects extend far beyond you, like ripples moving outward from a single drop. The realities you collapse radiate into your environment, shaping events, influencing relationships, and drawing circumstances into alignment. What begins as silence becomes a wave strong, enough to reorganize entire aspects of your life, and even though no one else can trace its origin, this is the ripple of collapsed realities, the unseen consequence of embodying a new state until the field has no choice but to respond. Relationships and resonance. Consider relationships. How many times have you tried to change someone through words, persuasion, or argument, only to find them resisting even more? Yet when you shift your own state, they often change without explanation. Collapse works like resonance. Just as a vibrating string sets another string into motion, your embodied state sends signals that others unconsciously attune to. A calm person enters a tense room, and within minutes the atmosphere begins to soften. A person radiating certainty influences others to feel safe without speaking a word. These are ripples of collapse in action, silent, invisible but undeniable. Physics offers the same explanation. Energy fields influence one another without physical contact. When one system vibrates in stability, others near it are pulled into resonance. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic fields describe this as a transfer of patterns, and quantum mechanics shows it through entanglement, particles linked in such a way that a change in one instantly affects the other, regardless of distance. When you collapse a new reality within yourself, the ripple moves into the larger field, reorganizing probabilities around you. It is not magic. It is coherence rippling through the web of connection, timing, and patience. But here is the incomplete puzzle. If collapse ripples outward, why don't people notice immediately? Why does it sometimes take weeks or months for evidence to appear? The answer lies in timing. A ripple expands gradually. It starts close to the source and then extends outward, touching further and further edges. The first shifts may be subtle. Your emotions feel lighter, your body calmer, small coincidences occur. Then the ripple grows stronger, opportunities arrive, conversations open, relationships shift. Finally, the wave reaches the distant shores of your life, creating visible transformation. The delay is not proof that nothing is happening. It is proof that the ripple is still moving. Think of it like planting seeds underground. You cannot see the growth immediately, but roots are forming invisibly. One day, seemingly overnight, sprouts appear. To outsiders, it looks sudden. To you, it is the natural result of silent work beneath the surface. The ripple of collapsed realities functions the same way. By the time others see the change, the process has been unfolding silently for far longer than they realize. This explains why some people appear to experience overnight success. They were embodying coherence quietly for years. They collapsed realities internally long before external evidence appeared. Then when the ripple reached a threshold, everything reorganized at once. From the outside, it looks miraculous. From the inside, it is inevitable. The ripple effect teaches us patience, not passive waiting, but active trust that every coherent signal you sustain is already expanding outward. The biological ripple. There is also a psychological element. Humans are wired with mirror neurons, cells that activate both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. These neurons explain why you yawn when someone else yawns, why moods are contagious, and why presence alone can shift a room. When you collapse into a new identity, your nervous system broadcasts that signal, and others unconsciously mirror it. They may never know why they feel different around you, but they do. This is the ripple effect at the biological level. The collapse within you becomes an experience for others without explanation. Here's the pattern interrupt. You don't need to convince anyone of your transformation. You don't need to prove your collapse or explain it to others. The ripple will speak for you. In fact, the more you try to prove it, the more you scatter the coherence that makes the ripple strong. Silence strengthens the signal. Quiet embodiment allows the ripple to expand without resistance. When the evidence finally arrives, it appears undeniable, even miraculous. But it was always the ripple of collapse doing its work. Spiritual traditions echo this same truth. The Tao teaches that true power is effortless influence, Wu Wei, action that leaves no trace yet shifts everything. Mystics speak of transformation as a fragrance, subtle but unmistakable, felt without words. Even scriptures advise prayer and faith in secret because the reward is not in being seen, but in becoming. All of them understood the ripple. When you collapse silently, reality cannot help but reorganize itself around you. So let this question linger as an open loop. If you are already collapsing realities and sending ripples into the field, what would change if you began collapsing deliberately? What would your relationships, your finances, your health, your destiny look like if every ripple carried coherence instead of contradiction? The field does not choose for you. The collapse is already happening. The ripple is already moving. The only choice left is which signal you will allow it to carry. The deepest truth about manifestation is that it cannot remain something you practice occasionally. It must become the way you live. Collapse is not a technique to pull out when you want something. It is the natural byproduct of identity sustained over time. When you stop treating manifestation as an event and begin living as if the desired reality is already yours, you shift from doing into being. And being is the frequency the field always responds to. Think of how nature works. A tree does not try to prove it is a tree. It does not announce its growth each day. It simply embodies treeness, silently, consistently, and inevitably. And it produces fruit. Collapse is the same. You do not need to force it. You only need to stabilize the state until it becomes who you are. At that point, the field no longer negotiates with your past identity. It reorganizes around your new one. And the changes that arrive seem sudden to others, but to you, they feel like the most natural unfolding in the world. Science supports this reality. When neural pathways strengthen through repetition, old circuits weaken, and the brain prunes away what is no longer used. Over time, the nervous system no longer identifies with the past. The body stops rehearsing stress, fear, and limitation. Hormones regulate, heart coherence stabilizes, and the electromagnetic field around you becomes stronger and clearer. This is biology living as the collapse. It is not temporary, it is self-sustaining. Your entire system shifts into a new baseline, and reality conforms because the signal you emit has become undeniable. Spiritually, this is what Neville Goddard meant when he said to live in the end. It is not about pretending. It is not about forcing belief. It's not about pretending. It's about embodying the version of yourself who already lives the reality you desire. In that embodiment, doubt fades. not because you fought it, but because it no longer fits who you are. Fear dissolves, not through effort, but through irrelevance. What remains is coherence, and coherence always crystallizes into form. Here lies the paradox. The quieter the becoming, the more lasting the transformation. Loud declarations often echo from insecurity, but silent embodiment imprints truth into the fabric of reality. You stop needing to prove anything to anyone. You simply are, and the field bends in recognition. This is why ancient wisdom honored humility, secrecy, and inner devotion. They understood that reality moves most profoundly when you stop chasing and start being. Yet, here's the curiosity. Loop to carry forward. If collapse is constant, then every unconscious moment is shaping something too. You are never idle. You are always choosing, always collapsing, always sending ripples through the field. The only question is, are you doing it consciously? So the invitation is both simple and sacred. Stop rehearsing the old story. Stop inhabiting the self who doubts. Begin living as the one who has already received, who has already become, who has already collapsed into the timeline once imagined as distant. When you do, watch how quietly everything rearranges itself. Opportunities align, relationships soften, health reorganizes, abundance flows, and to those watching it will seem effortless. They will ask, "How did you do it?" And you will know the truth. It was never about doing. It was about being. You lived as the collapse, and reality had no choice but to comply. Before we close, here's your next step forward. If you feel called to take this deeper, to move beyond theory and root collapse into your daily rhythm, I've created something designed precisely for that. It's called Awaken Your Quantum Power, a complete guide that translates these principles into lived experience. Inside, you'll find the frameworks, exercises, and rituals that turn collapse from an abstract concept into a tangible, embodied reality. You'll find it linked below, not as more information, but as the continuation of what you've already begun, the stabilization of your becoming. Because the real secret of manifestation is not asking, it's collapsing, not wishing, but being. And when you live as the collapse, you're no longer chasing a reality. You're walking inside it, quietly, powerfully, permanently.